Humanity commits war crimes and, therefore, should not participate in our wars. Professor Luther's declaration hung in the air as his class of alien students fell into stunned silence. The lecture hall, carved from smooth metal walls and bathed in the sterile glow of interstellar lights, seemed to vibrate with the weight of his words. "Yes," continued the professor in a tone that was a mixture of disgust and admiration. "You may have heard rumors of human brutality on the battlefield, but I can assure you that the reality is far more disturbing. The classroom is filled with various alien species, each representing a different member of the Galactic Federation. They were 7 gray-white cricks, their large, polished eyes blinking rapidly in a way that could only be interpreted as nervousness like the Great Vosk. His thick armored skin leaning forward in his seat. Frowning, he frowned, even his normal brows. Calm and emotionless, Zarek's transparent jelly-like form seems to carry waves of discomfort. One of the students, a young Wiccan with light blue skin and 4 nimble arms, tentatively raised his hand, but Professor Luther was no weaker than many of the Alliance species. How could they be considered such a dangerous Luther to turn their eyes to students? His big black eyes were slightly narrow. What you see is not their physical strength, which makes them dangerous. This is something much more deceptive, something unexpected. The professor activated the holographic display behind him, and a series of images flashed to life. The first image shows a human soldier in a primitive body and armor standing on a pile of rubble. His face was smeared with dirt and blood, and his eyes burned with an intensity that seemed to surpass the image itself. This was one of the last conflicts they were involved in before the band, during the human siege of Talver. Luther explained, lacking advanced weapons and the simplest armor, this man caused the deaths of more than 3,000 Contempt warriors overnight, and a collective gasp rang out in the classroom. The lifting was known for its durability and wildness in the battle. Their soldiers stood almost 9 feet tall with claws that could do through steel. The idea that one seemingly ill-equipped man could cause such destruction was beyond comprehension. Another student, a reptilian Rakash with scales that shimmered in shades of green and gold, snorted in disbelief. "It is turned off. What weapon did he use?" Luth, the expression of the core, eclipsed no weapon but his mind. Humans have an unparalleled capacity for violence and a disturbingly creative approach to warfare. They don't just fight, they adapt. They improvise. They find ways to turn the most innocent objects into instruments of death. He pointed to the next picture, which showed the aftermath of the siege. The battlefield was littered with corpses of mocking warriors, their massive forms lying in pools of dark, viscous blood among the dead. Crude improvised traps, sharp shards of metal tied to ropes, makeshift explosives rigged from scrap materials, and pits filled with sharpened stakes. It wasn't just his fighting prowess that made the mockery fall. Luther continued. His ability to think differently, to find solutions where others only see obstacles, is what makes humans so unpredictable and dangerous. The class is silent. The professors' names were obsessed with a heavy corpse. It is a calculated, almost animalistic instinct to survive at all costs, a quality that defies all conventional notions of war. One of the students, a slender man with bioluminescent markings that flickered softly in the dim light, leaned forward with a mixture of curiosity and worry. But if they were so dangerous, why not keep them all together? Of course, the Alliance can lift a hand, which makes him silent, which makes it easier for them to say it. The Alliance considered it once, but they quickly realized that when threatened by extinction, people became stronger. They fought like hooked beasts, tenacious to the point of madness. The more you push them, the more dangerous they become. He paused and allowed himself to understand the gravity of his words. This is the only way to ensure that its destructive potential is limited. The student who had just run raised his hand again. All 4 fingers were trembling slightly. But Professor, isn't it unfair to single out such a species? Aren't we denying them the right to defend themselves? Luther's look from the outside softens a bit. It may seem unfair, but consider the alternative of allowing humans to participate in the galactic war. It would be tantamount to unleashing a force of nature, a force that even the most advanced coalition species cannot fully understand. Or control. This is not a matter of justice, but a problem of survival. The room fell into silence, and the students struggled with the worrying truth they had just learned. They had always been taught that the Alliance's ban on human involvement in the war was a reasonable measure, a way to prevent technologically backward species from being overwhelmed. But now they realize that this is something more complex and terrifying. Turn off the hologram and face his class again, remembering this lesson. Well, the galaxy is full of mysteries, and not all mysteries are meant to be understood. Some are just to avoid. The professor looked at the time and then nodded slightly. That will be all for today. I suggest you consider what we are discussing. Tomorrow, there will be a follow-up meeting. He experienced firsthand the horrors of human war and the heartless ingenuity of the human mind that lost friends and colleagues. He knows better than most that the ban is more than a safety measure. It was necessary, but watching the last student ask a lingering question that drove his mind. The galaxy was vast and unpredictable, and despite all the Alliance's precautions, he still couldn't do it. The next day, the lecture hall was packed. Word of Professor Luther's revelations had spread like wildfire across campus, and now every available seat was filled with students, their collective attention focused on the front of the room. Some had even gathered their faces in the aisles, impatiently waiting. The atmosphere was tense as they waited for the professor to arrive, their minds still on the previous lecture, and when Luce Cole finally entered the room, they fell silent almost immediately. He made his way to the center of the hall, his movements cautious and deliberate for a moment. He just stood there. There are several participants checking the room as if to measure the preparation of the audience. Today he spoke in a dry tone with a hint of playfulness. I think you all really want to know more about people. He again activated the holographic screen, and the planet's image appeared in the blue and green world, where its surface crossed war and conflict scars. This Luther started in Cadria 4, a former world colony. You may have heard about it in your historical studies, but let me assure you that what happened here is absolutely extraordinary, and it all started with the arrival of a human entity. The image turned to a group of human soldiers, their faces obscured by helmet visors. Their movements were smooth and coordinated, showing years of training and discipline as they held their weapons at the ready as they traversed the dense jungle terrain. This was supposed to be a suicide mission. Luther explains that the coalition must delay the Defiance long enough for our main force to regroup, and this human force is tasked with stopping them. They were outnumbered and completely surrounded. He paused to let the situation grow serious, but instead of retreating or surrendering, the humans did something completely unexpected. They attacked the screen and switched to showing people again. In the fight, they went through the bushes like phantoms. Although the number of people is small, people have initially been contemptuous of a certain degree of aggression and cunning games. Ruskell continued, to the bewilderment of the smirking commander. They didn't understand how this little power could hold, let alone repel, but then they realized something even more disturbing. People don't just struggle to survive. They enjoy it. Suspicious noise in the classroom. Most species have already left this original instinct student, and anyone can find happiness in this massacre. The loose core gestured to the monitor, which showed a human soldier standing over the body of a fallen contempt warrior, his chest heaving with exertion, but there was a wild, almost joyful look in his eyes. His expression was as if he had touched something deep. Humans call it the thrill of hunting, and there's something in Luther's tone that might be fear. They would lure mockery into traps and pick them one by one, which always stayed just out of reach. They made the jungle their own personal hunting ground, and for 3 days and nights they waged a guerrilla war. Unlike anything Contempt had ever seen, he stopped his gaze while sweeping the room, and then on the 4th day, people disappeared. The holographic display flickered, showing the aftermath of the battle. The jungle was filled with the corpses of mocking warriors, their formidable strength rendered meaningless against the humans by hit-and-run tactics, but by the humans themselves. There was no trace. They disappeared into the shadows, leaving nothing but destruction behind them. Detractors think they are being chased. Mad Lusker goes on to say that humans have lost all reason and are now nothing more than wild animals hunting for prey in the jungle. They were so frightened that they abandoned the colony and retreated completely to their ships, leaving Cadria with 4 people. He turned to the class with a serious expression. Such human forces, without support or reinforcements, had been able to rid an entire planet of one of the most feared species in the galaxy, and the room fell into a deathly silence. The students, who had expected to hear more about human atrocities, were now faced with something even more disturbing as they realized that humans were dangerous beyond their ability to kill. They are dangerous because they love war, so they find a way to turn war itself into a game where the stakes are life and death, and they always seem to emerge victorious. Above one of the students, a young Zarek, his transparent body slightly shaking, raised a tendril to the professor. If humans are so good at war, why don't they make war on us? What's bothering them? Conquering the galaxy, Luth's expression softened a bit, and he took a long, slow breath. My dear students, this is a question that haunts every member of the coalition. We don't know why they didn't pay attention to us. Perhaps they are content with peace? Maybe they are waiting for the right moment, or maybe they just didn't have a worthy opponent. However, he allowed these words. Submit in the air, a cool reminder of the uncertainty that surrounds people. The class had come to look for answers, but all they had found were several questions. Questions that no galaxies seemed to answer, and when they were sitting there, the consequences they learned. One thing was becoming increasingly clear. The ban on human involvement in the Galactic War was not merely a precautionary measure. It was a desperate attempt to contain a force that, if unleashed, could very well change the fate of the entire Luth core of the galaxy. Finally, he nodded to indicate the end of today's lecture. I encourage you to take some time to think about what we will discuss tomorrow. We will examine the Coalition's decision to ban human participation in war and its impact on our collective security. As the students left the room, their minds heavy with what they had learned, Luther watched them become restless. Humanity had long been an enigma, a mystery no one could solve, but now, as he delved deeper into their history, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the brink of a catastrophe that could shake the galaxy itself. Right now, the lecture halls are more crowded than ever. As word spreads across campus and beyond, Professor Luther uncovers secrets and truths long buried in mystery and fear. Today was the day he was going to address the most pressing of all real reasons. Humanity was banned from participating in the Galactic War. There was an air of anticipation when the professor entered the hall. He walked to the center of the room with a grim expression on his face. His usual confidence was undermined by the seriousness of what he was about to share. Today we face our most important decision. Once the Galactic Alliance was formed, Luthor began to raise his voice in a quiet room. You have learned that people can make them restless and can turn any environment to their own benefit. Compared to everything I want to discover, it all looks pale. He activated the holographic screen, and the room was weak as several complex documents and images appeared. These are classified Coalition files, declassified only after rigorous debate and fierce opposition. They contain the records of the final incident that led to the ban, a confrontation that almost ended. The image of the Galactic Alliance itself zooms in on a distant, barren planet. The surface is cracked and dry, with a thin atmosphere barely clinging to the planet's rocky surface. It was in this desolate world that the Alliance had its final showdown with an old enemy. The Tar Empire is a race whose military prowess has been unmatched for thousands of years. Tal conquers the galaxy, Luther whispered. They pushed the Coalition to the brink of collapse, and we turned to the people in desperation for help. We asked them to intervene to prevent them from destroying us. They agree that this condition means that this will be their last participation. The humans called it their final war. The hologram shifted to show the human forces arriving on the planet, but this time there were no soldiers visible. Instead, massive ominous structures were being deployed, fortresses that seemed to meld with the environment, bristling with weaponry and technology. Unlike anything the Coalition had ever seen. Humanity did not send soldiers to war, Luz continued. The machines they send out are designed not only for battle but also for destruction. These machines are remotely controlled by human commanders light years away, but what makes them truly terrifying is not their firepower but their programming. The screen zooms in on one of the machines, revealing its intricate design details. It was sleek and deadly, with an array of weapons that could reduce entire armies to ash in seconds. But its most fearsome feature was its AI, a neural network designed to learn, adapt, and evolve. These machines are programmed with a single instruction: to annihilate their enemies completely, and they are designed to learn from each encounter, becoming more efficient and brutal over time. When the most fearsome species in the galaxy was wiped out in less than 3 days, Luther's voice dropped, and the Tackle ritual continued. All of their civilization has represented thousands of years, but nothing. Human machines did not leave survivors, nor did they take care of the remains of mortals. The room was so quiet that the students could hear their own breathing, indicating the impact of what they had experienced. The sound he had just heard was too loud to fully comprehend that the humans had not only defeated Taku, they had erased them from existence. After the battle, the human commanders simply turned off their machines and left. Lut Kor said his tone was heavy with resignation, but the coalition was left with a grim realization. We had unleashed a force that we could never hope to control with these machines. These tools of war were the product of a species whose understanding of violence and warfare was beyond anything. We can imagine the hologram flickering and Luther turning to his students. His eyes were filled with deep sorrow. Humanity has given us victory, but at a price we cannot bear. They have shown us that war is not a means to an end for them. This is the very end. They have been perfect. It turns it into an art form, not just a species of soldier. They have become the epitome of war. He paused to let his words sink in before the final blow. So humans were eliminated from the Galactic War not because they were too weak or too savage, but because they surpassed both. They had become the ultimate warriors, and we knew that if they were ever allowed to participate in our conflicts again, there would be no galaxy left to fight for. The silence of space was absolute. Each student struggles enormously with what they have just learned. Humans, a species they once considered weak and primitive, had proven themselves to be the most dangerous force in the galaxy and thus earned a place in history. It would never be forgotten. Lut Kor breathed deeply. His expression was tired but determined. Remember this hour? Well, the galaxy is wide and full of mysteries, but none of them is more terrible than the war. Let's hope we never use these last words to testify. A natural force that can never be temporary, and the Milky Way can only maintain the distance.